the founder and president of the Bridge Mediation and Leadership Solutions, which is a private mediation and consulting firm specializing in conflict management, executive coaching, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. Ms. Grisolano has a very long history as an attorney, mediator, and deep expertise in neuroscience, personality dynamics, and behavioral economics. And she was our teacher in IIC training, IIC mediator training, and one of the key areas of her interest in how the brain chemistry assists us, how it interacts with people's ability to react in conflict situations. So I would open the floor to Professor Grisolano. Please go, madam, and I would invite you to give your insights on this on the topic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really have been honored to be invited to come and speak to the law school and to be a part of your programming this spring. Really appreciate your invitation, Professor Gupta, and have so appreciated my growing connections and collaborations with members of the ADR community in India. It's so impressive how deep the knowledge is already, given the short period of time that mediation and conflict resolution ADR has been developing in India. Such leadership and
Hello, excuse me, sir. Oh,
yes,
Sarvajot, sir.
hello.
Laura, just a moment. It seems there's some problem. Yes, Ajay ji.
Okay.
Shall I start live streaming?
Yes, yes, please do. I thought you were already live streaming.
No, no, sir.
Please
मैं
start.
सर
Please start.
अभी स्टार्ट करके फिर आपको ग्रीन टिक मार्क दूंगा, फिर आप करिएगा सर.
ठीक है. Okay. Laura, just a moment. I think there's a technical glitch, and he's starting the live streaming.
Okay. So we'll start from scratch.
Yes, Laura, I think we can begin. That's the green tick. Yes.
Terrific.
So once again, let me invite Professor Laura M. Grisolano for the CADR guest lecture series. This is the eighth in the series of the guest lectures we are organizing. The topic for today is the tools offered by parasympathetic nervous system as applied to conflict scenarios. Uh, Ms. Grisolano is an attorney mediator, and one of her key area of expertise is how the brain chemistry interacts with uh, the environment in conflict situations. And I would invite Laura to present her views on the matter. Yes.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Professor Gupta, for the invitation to join the group today. It's really an honor, and I've appreciated your patience coordinating over this strange 12 and a half hour time difference. It's dark outside, but I understand you're just getting started with your day. So I appreciate all who are listening. I wish I could see you all. I have thoroughly enjoyed my growing collaboration with the Indian ADR community. It's very impressive, the leadership and the growth of this area of practice, given what a short time it has been before, since it was started. So, very excited to be here today. And honestly, before I get started with the presentation on the neuroscience of conflict, I just wanted to start by saying how sorry I am to hear the details of the recent surge in COVID cases across India, just devastating numbers, and the whole world is feeling very badly about how the struggle has spread just across the country. I was grateful to hear that President Biden authorized sending over some additional supplies and vaccines and vaccine materials. So hopefully that can be a small help. But my my thoughts and prayers are with you as you all struggle with this, especially those of you that are kind of personally dealing with the consequences of this rotten virus. Hopefully, we will finish the year in better shape than we've started it. But it's an interesting time to talk about conflict because we've both seen so many instances where communities are working together and levels of cooperation with drug companies and across governments and across communities and in hospitals. So in some ways it has been good for collaboration and community. On the other hand, so many difficult conflicts and contracts that need to be negotiated and new arrangements and everything sort of thrown up into the air that needs to be resettled. So an awful lot of conflict at the moment too. So hopefully the topic is resonant and relevant even as it sort of feels academic in the midst of such difficult challenges for your country and for the world right now. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Maybe somebody will let me know if you can't. I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow.
Yes, yes, Laura, we
You can
can
see
see
it.
this.
Excellent. Okay, great. Terrific. Okay, so the title today sounds a little bit more like a Las Vegas comedy movie. A hijacked amygdala, two vagus nerves, and a head full of oxytocin. Not quite the exciting Vegas heist story, but some really interesting subjects to talk about in terms of the neuroscience of conflict. Just a little bit about where I'm coming from. I do have a private practice in the United States, Bridge Mediation and Leadership Solutions, and I offer sort of a suite of services that help people in conflict, straight, discrete mediation sessions, then a more ongoing conflict management consulting practice, working with teams to try and kind of help them heal conflict, bring them back together, reorganize. Leadership development services to help train people in empathy and communications and kind of deepen their professional and EQ skills, and also executive coaching to help people individually work on really whatever they need to in order to reach their professional goals. So I come to this work with some wonderful experiences, even though the path was a little bit winding. My mom was a neuropsychologist, so I grew up in a family of people that talked a lot about the brain, talked a lot about human behavior. She was an expert in traumatic brain injury, so her patients frequently had pieces of their brain that were not functioning normally, which also gives you a lot of insights into how the brain works when it's whole and doing well, and how each individual piece of the brain is so important. So brains and psychology and people were a big part of our household. I also was sort of born with a kind of mediator liaison personality. So across my life, I've ended up in roles that were the liaison to organizations. At my law school, for example, I was the liaison between the faculty and the students. At my college, the administration and the students. So it's sort of my natural tendency anyway. I've stayed involved as a trustee of a liberal arts college, which involves a lot of difficult and complicated management. I tend to be, again, the mediator in those sessions as we train young leaders. For law school, I had the privilege of going to the University of Chicago, so I studied under young Barack Obama before he was president, Cass Sunstein, who's an extraordinarily wise behavioral economist, and others as well. So have learned a lot about why people do certain things and how we can nudge them into different kinds of behaviors, how we set up systems to encourage outcomes. I worked for a federal judge after law school and practiced as a litigator, so I also saw up close the legal system and how the legal system handles case resolution. Oftentimes it's not in a very helpful way. There are easier ways to bring the parties together, hence the focus on mediation. It shortchanges things, it's faster, and usually ends up with better solutions than having to run it all the way through the court system. And then lastly, I've worked for a lot of political candidates, presidential candidates, worked in government, and so I'm a big believer in democracy and in systems that help add structure to dispute resolution so that we don't have to resort to more violent and unhelpful means of resolving conflict. What I don't bring to this topic is a PhD in neuroscience, nor do I bring a master's degree in neuroscience, nor do I bring, frankly, any formal training in neuroscience. So apologies to any doctors or true neuroscience scientists in the crowd, because I really am sort of an armchair student and piece together what is helpful, but I'm sure the subtleties of my neurological expertise, are many. So apologies for that. I wanted to talk today about sort of three key concepts, and we're short on time, and I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. So I'll zoom through the topics a little bit to make sure that we have some time if people want to talk about any of this more deeply. The first is just sort of an overview of how we are hardwired both for conflict and for conflict resolution. It's the product of our evolutionary history. So we have the systems that we need to protect ourselves, but also to get ourselves out of conflict. And the more we know about those systems, the more we can use them. The anger cycle in particular is a very specific physiological pattern. And the more we understand it, the more that we can kind of jump in and use shortcuts and strategies, little hacking tips to shorten the anger cycle, to take people out of conflict and anger and into more productive ways of resolving problems. Lastly, I want to talk about oxytocin, which is a subject I'm really interested in. I really wish I was an organic chemist or neuroscientist to know as much as possible about this very interesting molecule, but it is clear that we can use our knowledge about this hormone to help lessen conflict, to increase collaboration. And I want to teach you some special tricks that have been incredibly effective for me as a mediator and as somebody who's worked in conflict resolution. So those are kind of the highlights. And part one, this is really the, talking about how things are really hardwired and built into our system. So one of the things that we already have as a tool is that we are hardwired for empathy. From the minute we're born, we have these tools in place in our bodies. We know we've all experienced that moment when, you see somebody else yawn in a crowd and we yawn too. We mimic behaviors from an evolutionary perspective that will keep us safe. So we yawn if somebody else yawns because it could potentially indicate that we need more oxygen. So even that mimicry behavior is sort of a somatic empathy. We're also hardwired to not hurt each other. So fascinating studies involving rhesus monkeys. They were put in an experiment where in order to be fed, they had to pull a chain, and they would have access to food, but simultaneously another rhesus monkey would be shocked, a painful shock. And it didn't take very long before the rhesus monkeys figured out that their action in getting the food was hurting their friend or their fellow monkey, and they stopped pulling the chain. They stopped feeding themselves so as to avoid hurting other primates. And one subject, in fact, even went without food for 12 days, basically went on a hunger strike, saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to inflict pain on my partner. And so those empathetic behaviors are wired into our system. We are also biologically trained to be compassionate. So this is a situation where this chimpanzee had been in a fight and lost. This was a female chimpanzee, and the child saw that the mother was very upset that she'd lost this fight and went over and put his arms around his mother to console her. not something that he had been trained to do, obviously, just that natural reaction of compassion, which is just really stunning. And lastly, especially interesting to those of us in the conflict resolution world, primates also exhibit reconciliation behavior. So this is another picture taken in the field. These two primates had a fight, and then were spotted basically making up this gesture of the outstretched hand, saying, "Hey, I'm sorry. Let's get back together." And in the picture that follows, or the moments that follow, they actually met in the middle and embraced, which is just sort of stunning. So we have this built into our bodies already. However, we're also hardwired for conflict. We know that conflict was necessary for survival. So we know that animals, when they're threatened, adopt one of three strategies: they fight, or they fly, or leave, or they freeze. And humans have that same impulse, that instinctive reaction. So, when we were in the early days, pre-literate, and just trying to survive, we also had that built-in reaction that we needed to run away quickly if we were confronted with danger. We still have those physiological reactions built into our bodies. Clearly, we have much more complex thought now. Our conflicts are different than being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, but those brain structures that helped us survive are still in place. And so we have cycles of response that mimic the same, that are the same as our prehistoric reactions. So even in political conflicts, the debate between the vice presidential candidates, you see those same conflict behaviors coming into play. So to help us understand this, it's useful, I think, to kind of know how these systems and our brains developed. There's a theory called the triune brain theory. It was developed by this guy, Paul MacLean. And I think in like the 1960s or 70s, 60, it says 60. And it sort of traces how the three kind of primary structures of the brain developed over time. It's also been pointed out, there's been a lot of scientific work done since then, and we know now that this is sort of a simplistic explanation of how the brain developed. So it's much more sophisticated. There's a lot of rewiring. Caveat that this is a fairly simplistic understanding of how the brain's pieces work together, but it's accurate in that these things are true. It's just a little bit more complicated. I think it's super helpful to understand these three pieces, because when we get in conflict situations, or our clients or our friends or our family members get into difficult situations, you can watch these structures of the brain play out. So the first piece is what we would call the lizard brain, or the reptilian brain. Some people call it the R brain. And it's really that basic, pre-thought survival brain. So, aggression, preservation of territory, making sure that, you have the food that you need, you're safe, you're not eaten by something else, and you procreate to continue the species, right? So that's the lizard brain. And they'll fight to the death. They'd rather run away. Really, they just want to eat, sleep, and have children, right? So that's the lizard brain. All on autopilot, right? They're not having conscious thoughts like, I think I'm going to go have flies now for dinner, right? They're not thinking in that way. But as animals evolved, we ended up developing the midbrain system, sometimes known as the limbic system. And this is where, more higher order mammals, you can see, have some level of emotion. They feel pleasure. They can plan a little bit, right? They have memories of things. So a cat will remember if I jump on her lap, she will pet me. Or a horse might remember if I run to that field, I will have, the sweetest oats, right? And if I go over there, I might be in danger. So it starts to help this limbic system and the midbrain help us start to kind of form memories that match experiences with outcomes, and then kind of can guide our behavior more thoughtfully to maximize pleasure and minimize risk. And these are some of the key structures in this part of the brain that are so important. So then we get to what we think of as sort of the human brain, right? The one that's responsible for really complex thinking, learning, memory, language. We can read, we can communicate with other people thoughtfully, and we're self-conscious, right? We're aware that we are aware, right? We can think about thinking. And so this is the brain that can plan, that can help law students organize their materials and make plans and find the job after school. This is where we reason and solve problems. So the most important piece of that is the frontal lobe, which governs what we call executive functioning. This is really all of the things that law students and law professors, for that matter, need to keep track of to be successful. Where am I in this project? Do I need to start the research? How am I going to organize my time to get everything done? When is it appropriate to ask a question and when is it not appropriate to ask a question? All of this sort of higher order thinking, curiosity and creativity and innovation, all of this happens in this frontal lobe. So that's where we're more likely to spend time solving problems and collaborating than fighting, right? Different parts of the brain. Now, when we think about fighting, we need to get back to that mammalian brain, the midbrain, and understand about the amygdala. I wish I could see all of you and I could have you raise your hand about how many people know about the amygdalae, and know how they work. But since I can't see you, I can't pull you, I'm going to just give you the basic scoop. So on each side of our brains, we have these little, they're shaped like an almond, kind of small, and they are basically the systems that govern how we take in information from, like, sensory information about threat and possibility, and then process it to decide, is this a dangerous situation or are we good, right? And if the amygdala decides that the situation is risky or dangerous, then it basically shifts everything, triggers a rush of hormones that then prepare you to respond to the crisis, right? So again, I've picked up that there's a saber-toothed tiger. I need to run. So my amygdala takes over and it just sends all of my energy and resources into survival. This rush of hormones can take about 20 minutes on average to kind of take over your body and change what's going on. And then slowly that rush of hormones starts to go away. So you will all recognize the responses to the result of an amygdala hijack. We call it a hijack because it's basically the amygdala says, nope, you're not going to think anymore. We're going to put you on autopilot and we're going to just take care of you. You don't even get to think about anything. We're just going to give you resources to survive. And I always think about it as, you have to go up in front of a class and make a presentation or an audience, and you feel that fear. It's not a tiger chasing you, but it is a scary moment. And all of these things happen to you. So your heart rate increases because you need more blood flow. Your lungs open up. You start breathing faster and faster because we need the oxygen. And then interestingly, our throat closes so that we hold in that oxygen and have more access to it as we need it. All of these things happen as a result of this hormonal flow, cortisol, adrenaline, all of these things happen. And all of these processes are triggered when we get into a conflict situation. So it might be your neighbor does something that's really infuriating and you're so angry, right? It doesn't have to be a physical risk. It can be something that's just very maddening, right? You're so mad. All of these things happen. Your amygdala picks up that it's a danger. So the good news is that once we understand this system, the anger cycle, we can actually disrupt it and we can sort of stop it from having to take all this time, stop people from saying things that they will regret later, making the conflict worse. So we use what we know about our body's own reactions to conflict to be more effective, especially as mediators or lawyers, or even just as partners with our spouses. So a few key strategies to calm down. The first thing, and I'll frame this in many of you will work with clients either as mediators or as attorneys. And what you want to do is try to get them to shift back into frontal lobe thinking, back into that higher order thinking. So you want the blood to sort of return, control, agency to return to that thinking part of the brain. So one of the things that you can do is just ask people to think about why they're mad, because you can't think about it as a lizard. You have to think about it with your very sophisticated frontal cortex. So in one subject, people were made angry, and one group was asked to just write something, and then the other group was asked to write about their anger. And the group that just wrote about their anger, how and why they were so angry, actually calmed down faster because they were using their brain to think about and analyze what was going on with them, and it slowed down that reaction and helped them get back to stasis faster. So, the biggest strategy is to just invite other parts of the brain to take over. Curiosity is a wonderful way to do that. Ask yourself whether it's you that's hijacked or your client. Ask curious questions. What's going on? What do I want to do now? What's in the way? What are the opportunities? How can we do things differently? Anything that sort of forces that higher level thinking. One way to do it is to even think about what happens in an amygdala hijack. So you're up on a stage, you're very nervous, your throat closes, your voice starts to sound very strange and scratchy. If you just sort of say to yourself, okay, this is what's happening. You say it in your head, don't say it to the audience. I'm sweating because my system is overheating, and my sweat is my body's response to being upset and hijacked. I need to cool down. I started overheating because my amygdala detected something that might be threatening to me and make me nervous. That's etc., etc. And just think about what's happening, and that will actually calm you down. Your blood pressure will return to normal, and you'll be able to give your speech without your throat sounding strange, right? So all of this works really well, but the key is really understanding the parasympathetic nervous system, which is we all have it, and it's all working for us all the time. But again, the more we understand what's possible and how it works, the more we can use it intentionally. So very quick overview of this system, right, our nervous system. So we have kind of two big pieces of the nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And again, apologies, this is like, for some high school biology, but I still have to remind myself of all these pieces. So the brain, the spinal cord makes up the central nervous system. And then the peripheral nervous system is everything that sort of goes out from there, all the nerves that connect to our organs and our systems and our muscles, the peripheral nervous system. Then within that peripheral system, we have the somatic nervous system, which we can control, like the muscle or the nerves that help us move our muscles, right over here. And that's voluntary, we can control it. And then we have these two pieces that are completely autonomous from our thought. They happen regularly in the background on autopilot. We rarely even think about the fact that they're going on. But the whole point is to keep our bodies in stasis. So if we get too ramped up, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in to calm us down. And so they operate together to keep us in balance. When we need to run away, right, the sympathetic nervous system operates and it helps us run. But then when we want to calm down, the parasympathetic nervous system are the nerves that connect us to the systems that are calming. So the nerves that will calm our heart or make sure that our blood flow slows down and the hormones that are amping us up stop going, right? So we want to tap into this autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and use it to help us faster than it might otherwise operate for us. The way that we do that is through this awesome trick, which I'd never heard of until, a few years ago. And it's called the vagus nerve. And we, again, have two of these. They run, I think the 10th cranial nerve. And they sort of start down the back of our head. And then they actually don't even run symmetrically through our body, but they wrap around our ears and into our throat and around our tongue. Then they go down and they wrap around our heart. And then down into our bellies and sort of right next to the diaphragm and in our stomach. The cool thing about this nerve is that it's close to the surface in many places. And so we can actually do things intentionally to trigger this calming nervous system, this vagus nerve. So things that babies do without even thinking about it, like rubbing their ear, right? Or laying on their tummy, right? So that their nervous system or their chest, that nerve is triggered by the pressure. And then there are, other tricks that we can use that also touch it. So, for example, if you put cold water on your face, that will trigger the nerve. If you put water inside your mouth and just sort of hold it, it fools your body to think that, oh, my mouth isn't dry, everything's fine. It's time to calm down, right? So we can use these tricks to tell our quieting nervous system, hey, we need to calm this down here. Let's bring it down. There is one really fabulous trick. I'm sure many of you know this. You might not know it by its name or why it works, but we all know that deep breathing is probably the fastest way to sort of regain control of ourselves. And one of the reasons that we use deep breathing into your belly is that, again, your vagus nerve is triggered by the fact that your stomach is expanding and pressing against it. So if I had you all in the room together with me, I would have you sit back and close your eyes, put your hand on your belly, and then feel what it's like to breathe into the base of your stomach and have your hand move. And do that just for just even 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, and you will feel your whole body, all that parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and will calm you down. Now, what do you do when you're with a client? You can't sort of explain diaphragmatic breathing, but you can say, why don't you just sit and plant your feet for a second, and before we do anything else, before we go back into that room for the negotiation, or before we do that next stressful thing, let's just take a few minutes and just get some deep breaths, because it'll help us, right? And you can have your client, guide your client or your teenager or your friend through this exercise to calm down those stress hormones and bring your body back into stasis. So another great trick for mediators and lawyers is to do the work of reframing a difficult situation and to use words that help calm people down. So I always think of it as like the pot boiling over, right? And everything's just going crazy. And then for some strange reason that I'm sure physicists would explain to me, if you put a spoon on top of that boiling pot, it won't keep boiling over. Well, neutralizing language can work it in that same way. So you basically take something that's been said that's just filled with anger and extreme words, and then you rephrase it in a way that calms it down. So you've got a roommate situation, and she says, oh, I just can't stand his apartment. It's disgusting. It's covered in trash and dirty dishes. It smells terrible. He's a pig, right? I mean, just extreme language and the anger. And then the person who's the mediator or the coach or the lawyer can say, it sounds like you're very concerned about the way he keeps his apartment. Is that true? Right? And you've basically reframed it using language to sort of take down the temperature of what's going on and start that calming process so that they can regain. This is a question, right? Is that correct? And so you're asking them to think calmly about how things are going. So those are some of my kind of key parasympathetic nervous system tricks to calm high intensity conflict situations.
It's 10 o'clock.
They can be practiced. Excuse me, that's my computer giving me some timing reminders. But the other piece I really wanted to share with you that I have found incredibly powerful as I've tried to implement it more thoughtfully over the past few years is the role that oxytocin plays in how we think about other people and how we treat other people. I'm sure you are all very familiar with the truth that when you have groups of people that are identified as groups in opposition, things just don't go well. I mean, in the United States, we have some very serious polarized politics right now with the last administration and those that didn't like the last administration. We have two different news platforms that rarely agree on even the issues that are important, never mind how they get talked about. And it's a very difficult situation because there's no collaboration around issues that are really important to get resolved. I have come to believe that one of the reasons why it's so challenging to make progress on this issue is because of oxytocin. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about it. And it's still kind of a hot topic for research. We're still learning. But there are some things that are very clear that I think are very interesting for people in our line of work. The first is that, oops, sorry, wrong button. Okay, I have trouble seeing my slides. Okay, so the first is it's very clear that when we divide people into groups, even when we divide them artificially, like we're going to put you guys over here, and we're going to put you guys over here, and we're going to keep you there as separate groups, it's very clear that we become less empathetic to the people in the other group. So all of those natural behaviors that we talked about that were hardwired, that we see in the primates, it does not hold as we relate to people in other groups, the us versus them experience. We tend to view people in the other group with skepticism. We don't believe what they say. We don't trust them. We don't care as much about them. We don't feel their pain in the same way. They almost are kind of dehumanized. And we know that that's true, but we haven't really understood why. So it seems that the why has a lot to do with this molecule called oxytocin, which again, not that I know how this process works at a deep biological level, but as I understand it, oxytocin is a neurotransmitter, a neuropeptide that is produced in these specialized cells in the hypothalamus. Once it's produced, it then moves into the pituitary gland and is then distributed into the bloodstream, where it does the work similar to other kinds of hormones that operate in our body. When it was first discovered, it was actually discovered by somebody who noticed that at birth there was a flood of this substance, oxytocin, that it had something to do with the labor process. And in fact, a synthetic version of oxytocin is called Pitocin, which can be used to trigger labor in women who are about to give birth or need to give birth. But we sort of came to know it in the 60s as the baby bonding hormones. We knew it had a role in birthing a baby and then the bonding between the mother and the baby, and how important that connection was for the survival of the baby. So it was, for a while, it was called the mother-child hormone or the baby bonding hormone. This is actually my niece and her new little baby. I couldn't help but use their picture. So sweet, right? So that's kind of how we thought about it. It's kind of moms and babies. But then we started to discover that it's more than that. It's not just a bonding hormone with babies, but it actually bonds us to other human beings. So it's very active in courtships and pairing, not just in humans, but in animals in many ways. And is so powerful that, we sort of see it when people are falling in love and having families, but it continues to operate in ways that keep us paired together. Further research also showed that it plays a role in trust. And so this guy, Zach, Paul Zach, is sort of one of the experts on this topic. He did some really interesting experiments. And what he discovered is he would sort of in the kind of in the nature of those games that economists have subjects play to sort of see what behaviors, negotiating behaviors, decision behaviors will emerge. He saw that the people that had received in this trust game where you're partnered with somebody, and based on the decisions that you both make, you either get more or less money out of this negotiation. And he saw that when people received a signal of trust, their oxytocin levels went up. So we thought, well, that was really interesting. And then he discovered that if you give people artificial oxytocin by, kind of spraying it in the room, kind of artificially for them to breathe in, they started exhibiting more trust behaviors. And so he became very famous for a while. It probably still is very famous for the trust hormone and how that plays out, and its potential to kind of make people more reciprocal and collaborative in engagements. But it turns out it's even more complicated than that. And so his view was also called into question, because it turns out that, yes, oxytocin does help us bond and empathize with other people. It helps us comply with norms of care. We take care of people. We sacrifice to protect vulnerable people. We extend trust and cooperation to people in our group. We give them the benefit of the doubt. We believe what they say, but it also plays a role in deciding who we don't trust. There are studies that are coming out about how oxytocin plays a role in the way that we look at other people's eyes and the dilation of their pupils and decide if they're somebody that we can trust or not trust. So if you've ever been in a situation where somebody's offering you something and you're kind of looking at them, do they seem like a person I can trust or not trust? You're actually making that intuitive judgment, based on a lot of data points because of oxytocin. So it is actually the hormone helps us categorize people based on their trustworthiness, and it pushes them into our group and their group for all sorts of reasons that we're still sort of trying to figure out. So once we do that, once we've actually put people in another group, oxytocin also either elevates or dampens that amygdala activity that makes us feel conflict and angry and fight with people, right? And we do that now based on whether they're one of us or one of them. One of us or one of them. So yes, it helps with in-group favoritism and taking care of people, which helps us have a civil society and cooperate and have social structures. But it also dictates from an instinctive, process who we can't trust. Now, we know that is sometimes based on incorrect information. This actually works even if people are artificially sorted. So there's another computer game where students are put in front of a computer to play a game, and they're given information as to whether the computer is working with them or not working with them, right? It's super artificial, and their own behavior and the way that they read and interpret information is completely different based on whether they become skeptical of the exact same information once they think that the computer is with them or against them. And if you switch it, they will have a completely different interpretation. So this idea that this hormone prompts non-cooperation is something that we need to be really aware of. And again, the cool piece is that we can use it. We can use this information. So if these are the things that we do to people that we trust in our group, and these are the things we mistrust them, we hoard, resources, we're skeptical of them, we can use this information about oxytocin to change that. And in mediations, I've found that it is incredibly powerful to take people that are fighting, people who are not talking to each other, who are super angry, they can't get to a resolution. If you convince them, even artificially, that they're on the same team, they will start listening to each other, they will start believing things, they'll problem solve together, and they'll collaborate. It's almost magical and strange. And I'll tell a final story in just a second where all of this whole cycle kind of went together. But these are the very specific things that I've discovered, is that you can use language that implies a team. So you say we, and we're going to do this together. So as a mediator, I would say the three of us are going to solve this problem. We're going to come up with some options. As co-parents, right? If I'm working with two parents that are divorced and they're trying to raise their children separately, or because they're divorced now, I can say as co-parents together, and I put them back into the team, and that will soften the way that they think and talk to each other. You can put people on the same side of the table. So instead of putting people face to face, put them on the same side of the table. So they're all looking up at the whiteboard and we're all brainstorming together, right? We're doing something to solve a problem. We're using our frontal lobe, so we're not in conflict or we're not hijacked. We're working together as one team. You can do it too with other groups. So I work with a company that had two departments that were supposed to be collaborating, and they really didn't trust each other. They didn't like each other very much. They had different agendas, different ideas about how things should work. But you put them on the same team. So instead of engineering and customer service, you put them on the same team. Oh, now you're team 2022 innovation. Suddenly they're a team. And now all of a sudden they'll listen to each other and collaborate. And you can use name tags, you can use seating, you can use colors, anything to sort of fool people. And you think about global politics, right? As soon as people have an enemy, suddenly they'll work together, right? The US will come together, to fight with somebody else when in fact, currently we're fighting internally. So it's a very strong, a strong and powerful effect, but it's pretty easy to manipulate. And lastly, if you focus on a problem to be solved rather than untangling the disagreement itself, rather than on looking at the past, put people on a team to look forward. And it turns out that it's useful in law and litigation, in families, with neighbors, public policy. Shockingly, it works really, really well. So I think that is the last of it. I can tell I want to answer some questions, but if we have more time, I can tell a story of a mediation where sort of all of these things played out. But I really did want to stop and see if we had any questions.
Thank you, Laura, for that wonderful presentation. So what we'll do is first we'll open questions to this group, and if to the group in the live streaming over YouTube. And if nobody has a question here, then I can move in the WhatsApp from various students and colleagues. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So anybody in this group that would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and go ahead.
I don't know if the chat is working, but that also is fine as a way to raise a question.
The chat is working, I think. Uh, okay, so I will go ahead with the questions that I have received over WhatsApp. So I have a very strange question from one of our students, but I have also received this from one of my colleagues who is a lawyer.
Excellent.
He's asking me that how do we know if some person is really angry? I mean, can people conceal their anger cues? Because in real life situations, people sometimes do weaponize anger. So if that is the case, of course, nothing would work. I mean, they're just pretending to be angry and using it against people. Is it possible to know that?
Yes, I think it is possible. I mean, it sort of goes both ways. Some people will pretend to be angry in order to be manipulative when they're not really that angry. And then the opposite is also true, where people are very angry, but they feel for whatever reason that they can't express it, right? So you end up with two kind of different sides of the same question. I think if somebody is pretending to be angry, it might not be a harmful thing to to respond as if they are genuinely angry and use these same techniques. None of these techniques involve just capitulating and giving in to whatever they say they want, right? That's a whole other question and a whole other discussion about how do you identify what somebody really wants, even if they're saying, I want that person fired, or I want, this amount of money, right? That may not even be really what they need. So the techniques we talked about today, I don't think that there's any harm in using them if somebody's pretending to be angry. The hard part is when somebody is very, very angry and is not acknowledging that they're angry, then it's a little harder to kind of get them to participate in some of these things that will calm down, because they're not sort of cooperating with you in being genuine and authentic about what they're doing. But you can still use some of that language, the language work, some of the physical things about putting people on the same side. You can, use tricks like the deep breathing. All of those things can be helpful, even if somebody doesn't want to acknowledge. But then there are obviously other strategies that need to be used to get somebody who is angry to talk about it. Hopefully that's
Okay,
helpful.
thank you, Laura. So there's another question from Tejas. He is asking me, Professor, how does law students use this information in real life situations? I think what he is asking me is that law students are not really geared towards understanding the brain and on the physical reactions. We studied the doctrines. So how can we actually use them, absorb it, and use it for our own purposes?
Yes. So I will say I went to a law school that didn't talk about this at all. The University of Chicago, we barely talked about mediation. I mean, we barely talked at the law school about alternative dispute resolution. This I graduated in '98. It was not a place that thought about physiology or neurology or how to reduce conflict. Not at all. I will say, though, that even as a law student, you can use these techniques for yourself, just to practice them. And the more that you practice them in your own life, then when you get into situations where you have more power to structure the environment, then you will know what works and how to handle it, and how to use it with clients, whether you're mediating or whether you're representing somebody in court. Um, for example, it's, let's just say you're two lawyers and you're opposing each other in court. If people get very angry, it can actually work against the resolution, even in a court system, right? And so there are things that you can do, even with opposing counsel, to get on the same page and calm that person down so that the hearing or proceeding does not get, far afield from what the resolution that needs to happen. I will say, though, practicing as a law student in your own life will be very helpful. You can use these techniques with your family. So I would be shocked if people don't have any family member that ever makes them mad. That would be surprising. Most of us are
Hmm.
sometimes mad at our family members. And so you can practice the parasympathetic nervous system calming on yourself. Try all of the techniques. And you can have my presentation so you can access it. Or if you want to email me, you can have I have a list where these are sort of all in a list. Uh, Try them all. Try the water technique, try the diaphragmatic breathing, try the serotonin leveling that will keep you from getting mad to begin with. Try laying on your stomach. Try water in your mouth. I mean, just try it all, right? And then see what works. Also, try the frontal lobe guidance. Try being curious when you're really really mad, and you just want to scream. You're just so mad. Decide that you're going to be curious. Just for like 5 minutes, I'm going to stop being mad and I'm going to be curious about what's going on. And I'm going to write down some questions about why I'm mad, or why did that person do that, or what could we do? Why did this happen? And you're going to use that frontal lobe in your brain. And the more that you do this and train it on yourself, then when you are out there in the world and you have more agency and power, then you can guide other people in those same techniques.
Okay. So there's this question only from one of my classmates. So his name is Rohit, and he's asking me what would help, if it would help if we put either beer, wine, or caffeine on the table. Will it
Oh, interesting.
pull the
Very
level
interesting.
down, pull it up?
Very interesting question. So I frequently put out food when I have any meeting, whether it's litigation, mediation, anything where there are people who might be fighting, because we know that glucose levels and serotonin levels will help keep people out of conflict. Um, we also know that caffeine can increase creativity. So having some coffee, having some tea, can make people energized and more creative and kind of open up the blood vessels. My guess is that there are also situations where a glass of wine is helpful to sort of, I think it triggers some of those same parasympathetic reactions, right? The calming hormones. And so there might be situations where a glass of wine or a beer might be, might be helpful. Those are harder to use or recommend in professional situations because, one glass of wine might be helpful, two, not so much, right? So I think you have to be careful with those. But definitely, food is really helpful. You never want your clients to be hungry because they will be madder. I mean, there's a lot of research about feeding people before mediation and having snacks if you have a long debate.
Okay, and the final question is from Karthik. He's asking me, um, how do we stop this in-group versus out-group? I think what his question is basically that people are already coming with preconceived notions. So, uh,
Yes.
can you just put them, I mean, take it out of them?
It's very, very hard to unravel the belief that they've already formed about that particular polarized group. It's very hard to take it out of them, to convince them otherwise. And we know that just giving them facts, it doesn't work because they're suspicious of the facts. What does work though is almost kind of ignoring the subgroups and creating a new group to do something productive. So you have the A group and the B group. You can't really convince them, oh, forget about your, say they're, you know, one group wants cricket rules of one thing and another group completely disagrees, right? You're not going to convince them. But if you give them a task like, let's raise money for a new stadium, then together they actually might come together and let go some of that skepticism, some of the mistrust. Um, you saw that in the United States when years ago Kennedy decided that we would all, United States would come together for a space program and we would put a person on the moon, a man on the moon. Uh, and people were willing to forget a lot of the past tensions to work together, and support this effort. And so I think it's about inspiring and reforming a new group to help them, at least for a while, stop focusing on what they're mad about. I think about this all the time. I think about it
So
constantly. It's a very good
that
question.
seems to be the problem of our times, that people have decided that they already have a jersey, and very difficult to make them take that off.
Yes.
So the final question, I'm sorry, Laura, but I should acknowledge my colleague, Professor Akanksha Kumar here. So what she's asking is that all this is fine if we are doing in a physical space, but if we have a time-bound process online, how do we do this?
Yes. Of another very good question. I have the luxury in most mediations to have the opportunity to work with parties in advance. And so I use pre mediation conversations to set the stage, to ask them questions that make them curious, I sort of set them up to use these techniques. Much harder in a time bound, very short stretch. But I do think that you can make progress. You can use those uniting words. We should do this now. Again, it's always a little bit different if you're acting as a mediator, as a conflict resolution person in that short time space, or if you're acting as a litigator advocating for a party. But let's just say a mediator in a very short period of time, and you have two parties, and if you start using those words of we and together we will all find this an answer, it changes things very, very quickly if you sort of give them a task to do together. uh, it it's shocking how fast that will change the dynamic. Is that you with your
Okay,
camera
so
on
this,
that asked the
Yeah,
question?
thank you so
yes,
much.
that
My
is,
Zoom has been malfunctioning and I keep getting logged off and logged back in. So I'm really sorry about that.
Oh, no
Thank you so much.
problem. It's such a great question, and It's much harder if you have a short period of time because you don't have the opportunity to develop that trust, especially were you asking in a mediation context?
Yes, I was asking more in a time-bound online mediation space. That what if, I mean, I understand that the mediator's role gets way more enhanced when such reactions are triggered in an online space that is time-bound. Breakout
Yeah.
rooms might help, but not when you are completely time-bound using a third-party forum online. And that's why I
Yes.
asked.
Yes. No, it's really hard, and you have to be just ready to sort of immediately, create that problem solving. If you just sort of think about how do I get these two parties, even if they don't agree, solving the same problem. And sometimes it's just making a list, brainstorming. If you can just get them for 5 minutes, we're going to brainstorm ideas and we're going to just put up 10 options. And sometimes I'll start it. This is a crazy idea, but you could do this or you could do this. And these are crazy, but is there any other practical thing that we could do? How do we get rid of that? What are the 5 ways that we could handle that warehouse property that you're fighting over,
I think this is one of the reasons why mediators don't actually like online.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't
Yeah.
think it's really the first option. It's just that we cannot do offline and won't be able to do anything much about it till 2022.
Yeah.
That people are doing this online because mediation is just one dispute resolution method that works best when people are in close proximity to each other.
Yes.
So that's
I
that's a problem we will always have, perhaps, right? Can
Yeah, I think that's
make the
right.
best of
I
it.
I've definitely gotten better over the past year. At first, I just thought I don't even know how to mediate online. It was so awkward. But I definitely have become more comfortable and have, tools, use chat, use the whiteboard, breakout rooms. But um, it's not as good because you can't, mediators often are really good at taking in that information from body language and how are people sitting and what do their faces look like when that suggestion is made. We just absorb a lot of information from being with somebody in a room. So yeah, I can't wait to start mediating in person again. But sometimes people live far away, and even if we weren't in COVID, you have people on opposite sides of the country, and you have to do it.
And one more thing, like I just noted it right now, and maybe it's important because you see, when there are technological glitches, it triggers a sense of irritation. And I
Mm,
was wondering if you are a person already in agitated state of mind, what that might
mm,
do to you, and that might actually ruin the mediation. For
yeah.
example, if I'm getting cut off from the Zoom, I'm angry, but I'm not angry at the other
Yes.
side. I'm generally angry
Yeah.
at at
Yes.
at the world,
A
and
hundred.
very
Yes.
difficult to get out of that zone, right? So,
Yes.
so
So
I any more questions that you might have, you can. I think we have like 2 3 minutes. Any further questions you can put out in the Zoom or in the Google.
I will put up this is my email address. Feel free to, and my phone number. If you have any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Very happy to link in with people. If you have questions or ideas or thoughts, I would be super interested in, collaborating and getting to know you, hearing your questions. Happy to answer things offline as well.
So, Laura, thank you so much. And we would love to host you at some point of time in the future. I don't know when that time would come, but definitely I would love if you could, if in one of your trips you could join us in our campus.
Oh,
And we definitely hope to, from the Center of Alternative Dispute Resolution, we have been definitely hope to keep in touch with you and share our projects with you if
mm,
that is possible. And
I'd
thank
be
you
glad.
so much for your presentation today and taking the time off. It must be very late in US right now. And so thank you once again. And I
Hey,
shall sign off here. Thank you, Akanksha, also for joining
Thank you
us.
for the invitation. Wonderful to
See
see
you.
all of you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good luck with your mediations.